You should. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee meeting of the 30th of November. I declare the meeting open at 9 a.m. and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to advise attendees in the room that this meeting is being webcast and audio recorded and remind attendees to practice social distancing and take all the necessary safety precautions. Councillors, on the screen you have a motion for the recording of closed sessions. As today's agenda does contain a confidential report, I note that the motion to suspend the section 7.11A6 of the Local Government and Meeting Code for the purposes of audio recording the closed sessions in today's meeting of councils for council's internal confidential use only is now displaying on the screen behind me. Is there a mover for this motion? Thank you, Councillor Murphy, and Councillor Bradley has seconded. All those in favour? That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors. I've received one leave of absence from the Mayor, and there's a motion. There will be a motion on the screen in a second. Sorry to the meeting team for going too quick. Are there any other further leaves of absences? There are not. Would someone like to move the motion to give the Mayor a leave of absence? Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Seconded by Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Before I get into the reports, there are no reports for the Development Assessment Manager, Stephen Ball. Stephen, do you have any general business for us?
Through the chair, no I don't.
Councillors, do you have any general business for Stephen? No, there being none. Oh, congratulations, you can go back to work. And the same is true for the Health, Environment and Waste Manager, Michael Asnikar. Michael, do you have any general business for us?
No, Chair.
Councillors, do you have any general business for Michael? No? Excellent. Merry Christmas to you both. If I don't see you before then, I know I will. Alrighty, councillors, we'll now get into the meat of the committee reports with item 4.1, which is the report on the e-mobility trial. Before I move into discussions, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare at this time? There being none, I'll now refer to the Economic Development and Strategy Manager, David Radich, is valued offside Cassidy, to speak to the report.
Through the chair, and thank you and good morning, councillors. Logan City Council has been approached by Beam Scooter to run a e-mobility trial within the city. They're specifically interested in not the whole city at the moment, but parts of the city, being Springwood, Underwood, not all of Springwood, parts of Springwood, Slacks Creek and Woodridge. So they're looking to deploy between 200 and 300 scooters and e-bicycles for a 12-month period. So often as an economic development manager, I'll come to council and describe the opportunity of what we have in front of us. Obviously my team has done our due diligence on this organisation, and we've seen that they have quite a good safety record across Australia and New Zealand. So there is some recent media around scooters in Brisbane. Predominantly, from what I've seen, they've been private-owned scooters, but I just want to describe the opportunity to the council. So what we have here is an organisation that wants to come in for a 12-month period of time. They want to provide some data back to council after that 12-month period of time and see what the usage is. They want to plug that transport gap between transport nodes like public transport, bus stops and train stops and places of work. So they see that as an opportunity within the city. They're keen to come in. We're in the process of talking to them about what our expectations would be, what our service levels of agreements would be. For example, making sure that neighbourhood amenities protected by ensuring that any scooters that are left lying around outside of their docking stations are picked up immediately. So that's the opportunity in front of council today. The recommendation is that I enter into some negotiations with Beam Scooters for a formal licence agreement, and at the conclusion of the 12-month period I report back to council about the trial, and then council has a decision on the data that's provided to us by Beam, but also what our experience with Beam has been over that 12 months. So that's the recommendation in front of council today. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. I have questions from Councillor Lane and Heremiah. Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Mr. Radich. I had a briefing on this issue and I was really excited about it, and I must admit I still am. There's a few questions just in case people want to know. A person comes along in a mobility scooter and is confronted with a number of these e-scooters littering the footpaths. What is the company's responsibility in relation to that, and how do we stop that from becoming an issue? I like the idea that people can go and swipe on a scooter and ride around the community with their helmets on, and I think it's great that the trial's coming, but there are those questions relating to people with mobility issues being confronted with scooters laying on footpaths and things like that.
So through the chair, there's the way that these scooters work is that there's a docking station where you finish you start your ride and you finish your ride. There's a financial incentive for people to go to those docking stations. So if you leave your scooter lying around on a footpath, you're charged extra. There's also a concierge service that Beam's offered to council, where if any of these things are reported at any time, they will come in and immediately pick those scooters up and return them back to the docking station. So the agreement with Beam at the moment is that they will have 10 marshals patrolling the areas in Logan where the scooters are to be deployed. There's between 200 and 300 scooters, so that's about one marshal per 30 scooters. So they are really keen to ensure that the trial is successful, and they'll be acting accordingly. So to answer your question, there will be rapid responses, but there is actually a financial incentive to dock your scooter back where your journey started.
And the next question is, are there any local jobs that may be formed as a result of this trial, or a permanent situation?
Through the chair, so at the moment they're looking at between 10 to 15 jobs for the 12-month trial in Logan. There's also some other economic benefits that the council should consider, which I haven't spoken about. So Beam Scooters are looking to partner with local businesses, so to set up docking stations near local businesses, maybe a burger business or a coffee business, where if you drive your scooter to their premises and you dock in their premises, you'll get a discount on a coffee or a burger. So there are some other economic development benefits that will come from the city, and certainly it's a great way to activate some of the local businesses, and some of them have had a really tough year.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. I have Councillor Heremiah, Fraser, Murphy and Stem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Radich, on page 3 of the report, it states that this initiative will employ a team of 15 marshals. Does this mean 15 full-time equivalency roles?
Through the chair, so it is 15 full-time equivalent roles.
And also on that page, it states that Beam Mobility is in discussions with council for a service and assembly facility in Logan that could create about 50 jobs. With that facility, has a development application been lodged? Has a lease been signed? What is the current status of that project?
Through the chair, I guess the current status of that project is that they are interested in coming to Logan, but the gate that they really need to go through is this committee report to make sure that there's a sentiment of acceptance within council, because there'd be no point in them setting up a manufacturing or assembly facility if they didn't actually operate within the city. It is a real opportunity. They're looking at Underwood and Berrinbar.
And you mentioned about sentiment from council. In your experience, has a council in Australia ever rejected a proposal such as this?
Through the chair, I'm not aware. I'm not aware of anything like that. Whether there has been a rejection, I haven't done the research on that. Sorry, councillor.
So I've done a bit of research when it comes to my community, and just asking around and having informal discussions, in no way any formal consultation. But I wanted to know what people in my area thought, because they use facilities like Slacks Creek, and they use some of the great areas in our city where Beam wants to have their scooters. And some of the comments from my community, people like Barbara, and Barbara says, no, no, no. Lance says a definite no. And Natalie says no. They're a good idea in the city, yes, but not in our suburbs. And these comments reminded me of an article that was just published by the Chair of Transport in Brisbane City Council, Councillor Ryan Murphy, who states that saying no to shareable electric scooters might be the easy option, but the transport revolution is coming. And reading his article, I learnt that the great thing about initiatives like this is that they offer that last 10% of the journey. So if someone lives in Slacks Creek or Springwood, they can take an e-scooter from their house or their townhouse and connect it to some of our great public transport networks, and then use the busway to get to the city where they work or other areas. So it's about that last and beginning 10% of the journey. It's also really great for some of the young people in our city around Meadowbrook who go to Griffith University and Councillor Hall's electorate, who can't necessarily afford the upfront cost of an electric scooter over $1,000. They can afford $7 on an app now and again to rent it, but they can't afford that upfront cost. So there's a few advantages, and especially in summer with the weather, being able to get around on an electric powered vehicle compared to a normal scooter or a normal bike has some real advantages. So we're in an awesome opportunity to have these sort of initiatives in our city. But if we're going to introduce something to our city, we need to bring the community along with us. Government is here for the community. Government shouldn't act against the community. And my concern with this proposal at its current state is that it hasn't had that consultation with the community. We haven't gone out and we haven't talked to people and told them about awesome e-mobility features. And whether council should do that or the company should do that, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that our city's residents should be brought along the journey when it comes to new initiatives like this. I'm in support of the principle of e-mobility. We need it, it's the revolution, and we need to support it. But what's more important, especially with the transition like this, is making sure we don't alienate people, making sure people appreciate and understand the advantages of this transport model. If we introduce a system like this right now, I believe that many people may be apprehensive towards it because they didn't feel like they had their say. So my proposal, or my thoughts on it, no proposal, my thoughts on this is that I'm initially voting against this report, but I don't want that to be interpreted as me being against the principle of e-mobility. I'm just against the lack of community consultation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hartmeyer. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this ratio of scooters to marshals sounds really good, actually. That's awesome. However, I'm wondering, after this trial, if we do give the go-ahead for them to further stretch their tentacles out across the city, probably in my area too, because I've got quite a large commercial area too, are the ratios going to remain the same, or will they adjust it, I guess, based on what they they find over that 1 year trial?
Through the chair, so I think they will need to be adjusted. So let's be perfectly frank. So Beam will need to make a commercial decision whether they actually are making any money within Logan. They've decided to undertake a trial within Logan, which is a first step for a scooter mobility service to operate outside a CBD or a tourism location. So if they do feel that it is there is a market here, when they go beyond that 12-month trial and they need another council resolution, if we get to a supporting position here, they'll need to consider all those things. Was one marshal per 30 bikes enough? Maybe they needed more. Maybe they had a huge amount of call-outs. So these are the things that can be teased out in a trial. But to answer your question, they probably will need more marshals based on the foreseeable rollout into different divisions.
So just a couple of questions, sorry, Mr Chair. So I'm also wondering what the other councillors in those areas, what their thoughts are, but if they don't wish to say that, that's fine too, because I too am curious, as Councillor Hiramaya said, because it depends on what the appetite in our areas are. I know our areas aren't on the list, but they could be soon. So so what I'm wondering too is, have they considered future partnerships, so say with schools or something? Because I know that Browns Plains bus station at the shops, there could be a docking station there and it could go to the high school or up and down around schools and whatnot. Have they considered such things, and would they be formalised like concrete slabs saying this is where it goes, or we're not going to see just ad hoc areas where people just drop scooters or whatever off as they please? Is it going to be a specific sort of distinct area where people can see, where it'll be well away from footpaths and stuff like that, where people on mobility scooters and whatnot would be using?
Through the Chair, I might pass that over to Cassidy, and I believe that Beam Scooters has been in discussion with John Paul College around a partnership. So Cassidy, you can answer some of those questions.
Yep. So to the Chair, to councillors, the Beam, just want to refocus that this is a trial. So community consultations, discussions with partners will only be engaged once we agree on this permit, on this approval of operating. Beam will have a conversation with all the private entities, so shopping centres, schools, etc. We'll also engage the community through different ways, through, of course, all your social media, shopping centre stands and stands where their docking stations initially will be. They'll cover things like safety, courtesy around riding, and other technical things like using the application, downloading it, etc. With the community consultation, they, being a commercial and a private entity, they won't start engaging the community without having the certainty to be able to come and operate here. So the trial is, as it says, it's a trial. That's when they will decide if the community is ready for it or not, and if they will find any kind of financial benefits in it or not. So we are very kind of away from their operations, but they have the courtesy of engaging us to see if we would be supportive of them or not, basically. Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
All good. Thank you, Councillor Fraser. We've got Councillor Murphy, Stemp, Wilcox, Hall, Russell, Raven.
Thank you. Thank you, through the Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for bringing this report to committee today. I'm fully in support of this report. Beam will bring a new service to the city that is cost effective, it's on trend, and with the possibility of further industry coming with the assembly of possible scooters, which could only increase the jobs in our area. The business also brings overflow to economic areas like you said, cafes, restaurants, etc., maybe even hospitals like first aid. So I fully support this report, and I'm happy to move it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Stemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. So obviously this is a trial. It's not being proposed in Division 10, but I'm required to represent the whole city. And obviously these suburbs do back onto Division 10, so I'm guessing my community will obviously potentially use this. I appreciate the economic, environmental and active transport benefits. However, I do have some concerns in that we're trying to improve the image of our city. We're putting a lot of money into doing that, with updating facades, urban art, pride videos, etc. Yet we're proposing filling these suburbs with up to 300 purple scooters, which on a trip to South Bank on the weekend showed that, you know, no matter what colour scooters they were in bushes, they were tipped over, they weren't necessarily making the city look neat. So that's obviously one of my concerns. The other thing, I put it out to my community just to get some feedback because I was curious to see what their thoughts were. I it ended up being on a couple of shared to another page. It ended up coming back with 72 against and 41 for, which was really interesting. So it was good to get that and some comments back from the community. So what they had to say, that their biggest concern was the footpaths, to be honest, and their concern over whether we've got the infrastructure to support this. They understand that it can work quite effectively in CBD areas like the Brisbane, Gold Coast. But their concerns are obviously they're meant to be ridden on the footpath. Unless there is not a footpath, then they need to be ridden on the road. So their concerns are whether they're, for the pedestrians on the footpaths. They commented about people with mobility scooters, people with wheelchairs, the concern that they may be on the footpaths. I guess that's another thing. Is Logan, are these suburbs set up for that? So I guess that's one question. And the last one was...
Do you just want to let him answer that
sorry,
question?
I can. Yes,
Happy to, through the chair, happy to answer the questions as they come. So,
Okay.
First of all, was there any community request for e-scooters, e-bikes? Nothing specific comes to mind, although when we ran our 6 city centre summits, which is again very hard to say in a sentence, is people just want to be connected. And that's what we've tried to do with Springwood, that's what we've tried to do with Slacks Creek, is build those connections. There is a lack of public transport connectivity within the city. The e-bikes and the e-scooters may help break some of those gaps down. One of the number one issues for unemployment in Logan is the lack of access to public transport and private vehicles. So there's potential that this could solve some of those issues. With the concern around the public image of rolling out these scooters within the suburbs, it is a trial and it is a smallish trial. I guess if we felt that there were some really significant impacts on our neighbourhood amenity, we could build something into the contract to ensure that we had very rapid response times, or we had the opportunity to write to them, explain our concerns. So it is contained to a certain part of the city, so I'm not sure if, even if this trial goes ahead, if it would be widely known around the city.
Okay. And my other thing, obviously, we talked about schools and so forth, but you have to be 16-year-old to actually ride one. So I guess I'm just trying to understand the target market because, again, I think in the city, my understanding is, well, people will get off a train or a bus and then they'll get a scooter and then they will go out to somewhere and then that's the target market. So I guess I'm still struggling a little bit to see the target market is, and also how Beam will actually enforce the ride rules. That's another concern because if somebody's doing the wrong thing, how is that enforced?
Yeah, so with the target market, Beam's made a commercial decision to trial something in Logan. Other scooter companies have chosen not to. They don't see that there's a market here. So I don't know what the target market is, but Beam obviously sees something. We'll be able to get some of that information post trial, who's actually using this, if this is actually something that Beam wants to continue with. Sorry, what was your other question?
Again, how to Beam enforce the ride rules, I guess, was my concern as to, people doing the wrong thing. Sorry. If people are doing the wrong thing, how is that enforced by Beam?
So through the chair, the feedback that we've got from Beam is if there are consistent users that are doing the wrong thing, they will be banned from using this service. So it is linked to a credit card, so it's linked to a user. I understand that people can have multiple credit cards, but it is linked to a user, and if there is bad behaviour with that user, they will be banned from using the service.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Councillor Stemp. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you very much. Part of me, if this is in there, I can't read the report because I don't have my glasses and I can't remember if it was in there or not. How many kilometres can they be ridden fully charged?
That's a very good question. I guess it's every battery is different, so the scooters will be picked up every day to have battery changes and recharged. There's no real figure on that, but it'll be more than a couple of days if it's written in an average way.
So just curious, from the top end of the proposed map to the bottom, do we know how many Ks that is? I'm just wondering if they can actually be ridden outside of that zone, or if they're going to be locked and they can only be ridden inside that zone.
So through the chair, so they'll only be able to be ridden in this zone. So there's something called a geofence, which effectively means that it will shut down if you step 1 centimetre outside of that zone. Also within that zone, there are different speed controls. So the maximum limit, the highest speed you can go on a e-scooter or e-bike is 25 kilometres per hour. So it's all very controlled within that environment.
Okay, next question then. So with that proposed operating area, who selected that? Was that Beam or was that council?
Through the chair, so Beam saw the opportunity there, so they were quite impressed with the infrastructure that council had delivered, so that's what attracted them to the area, and this is the area that they selected.
So is there bikeways and stuff within this? Does it include the Slacks Creek bikeway?
Through the chair, it
I
does.
can't read this map very well at all, I apologise. All right, because I was curious to see how many bikeways it was going to use. My concern is that when they do shut off, when the battery's flat, they do litter the city. You see it in Brisbane, you see it at the Gold Coast all the time. They literally litter the city until they're gone and collected. It's not done for me in a timely manner to go and collect them. So that's my main concern, that yes, we're trying to improve the image of the city and we're going to have these purple bikes and purple scooters littering wherever they just stop in the city. So I think there needs to be a bit more research done before it goes to a 12-month trial.
Through the chair, so just to provide you some context around some of the service standards that we're looking at with Beam. So if they are dangerously located, they'll be picked up within 1 hour. If they are impeding access on a footpath, picked up in 1 hour. If it's fallen over and not parked in a docking station, it'll be picked up within 3 hours. Ultimately, all of these scooters will get picked up within 24 hours because each night they are taken away to be recharged. So there are some fairly stringent requirements that we're putting on e-scooters if council chooses to do a trial, which is completely up to you, but I would imagine that these guys will be on their best behaviour when they're trying to impress this council.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Councillor Hall, Russell, Raven, Kransky.
You know what I think looks worse than scooters which can be picked up that are littered around the city is old beaten up cars that students can't afford to fix littered around the city. And what this scooters do is they address an issue that we have, and that's some of the lack of transport avenues that many cities have. And having something like this takes those problems out of the equation. It allows students to have transport to get to the university and to get home. Not only that, through something like this, we can learn a lot about our footpath network and how we can improve them. We can actually make our footpath network safer for people who are mobility impaired, because we need to make them safer for these scooters. And you know, you mentioned some of the reasons as to why Beam Mobility chose Logan. They chose Logan because we're a progressive, forward-thinking city. And we need to get out of this mindset that we're not. You know, we can't just keep doing things the way we've been doing, because if you do that, nothing ever changes. If you care about the environment, if you care about reducing carbon emissions, these are the avenues the city needs to take in order to head in that direction. If we don't, then we're just turning our back on those things. You know, we can actually be part of the movement towards saving the earth and reducing carbon emissions, or we can turn our back and not be. So another thing was, some people are making it sound as if these we're just going to have jousting matches between e-scooters out in our city. And it's not the case. These e-scooters, I've read the report, are going to be very, very highly monitored. They're going to have cameras on there so they can capture the person who's riding them. Not only that, they are speed governed. So in certain areas where it's unsafe to drive fast, the speed will be lowered on these e-scooters without the control of the user. It will be put down by the company, making them safer. So you're actually having more control over the speeds of these things. You've got no control over a student in a car. They can go as fast as they want. But these, at least with this, it's a safer option. It's got my support 100%. And I think if we don't support it, well, then we're not living up to a mantra of saying that we are the Mavericks, that we are the renegades, we are the ones that strive forward and go into new areas and do things different. We're just like everyone else if we don't.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start by pointing out that Councillor Hall has pinched almost every argument that I had written on my bit of paper. So thank you. But so thank you to Councillor Fraser for raising, that this will be impacting on certain divisions. Although, of course, everybody's perspective is important. So I just wanted to share, I did a little bit of a quick Facebook consultation, and I had 28 comments, so people are quite passionate about this. I had 5 solid yeses, I had 5 flat no's with no reason, I had a couple of, this is interesting maybes, and then the rest actually came down to some the concerns that were raised. So there was concerns that they might get stolen. There were concerns that they might, litter our community. There's one that the footpaths aren't good enough. One that it will be too expensive for the city, and also that they're quite dangerous. And I actually think that the questions that have been asked and answered have actually answered all of those concerns already. So thank you so much for that. I have to just say thank you so much, Councillor Hall. Some of the concerns that about these perspectives, like these assumptions that people have been making in our community, we actually need to challenge that, and it's a trial. So that's exactly what we have the opportunity to do here, is to test this out and see what this will look like in our city. And there is actually no other way to do that other than to do a trial. So I 100% support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. I have myself and Councillor Kerensky. Dave, is there a way to cancel the trial? If the sky is falling and the worst nightmares of the councillors who've done consultation and seen the negative feedback comes to pass, and there's hundreds of scooters littering our footpaths everywhere in these suburbs, is there a way to go, whoop, we want to pull the pin?
Through the Chair, the licence agreement will be structured in a way where we'll give them a notice period, and then the trial will be cancelled.
Yeah. So if things are going pear-shaped, we're not locked in for a whole year.
That's correct.
That's great. And if we vote this down today, do you think we'll get another crack at it? Like, will they come back next year and ask, or do you think they'll just move on to a city that's interested in their service?
Through the Chair, it's a difficult one for me to answer. I think if council was to support it, it would, and there has been some recent negative media about what's happening in Brisbane, it would show a strong, brave position for council.
Thank you, and I've got you, Councillor Badley. I'd probably just compare the negative feedback that councillors are getting to what happened when Wing first came to the city. So when Wing first came, and they did a long period of community consultation, mainly because the bushfires deferred when they could start flying, because they couldn't fly with the heat and smoke conditions. And they did a long period of community consultation through which there was some very, very loud negative voices that said similar things to what Councillor Jeremiah was describing. No, 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 we can't have this. There was threats to shoot the drones out of the sky if they flew over their house. Like, the people who did not want it were very passionate and vocal about not wanting it. Fast forward 2 years later, 5,000 flights across the city every week, and expanding every opportunity that they can as soon as they can find sites to do it. And there's still negative voices, but they are overwhelmed by the silent majority of customers who love the service. And I think that's what you'll find with this as well, even though it's a pretty narrow trial. I appreciate councillors are receptive to their community's feedback, and 74 responses, 28 responses. I don't know how many councillor Jeremiah got, but just to put it in context of everyday council business, I've got a DA at the moment that's at 500 comments because people don't like it. That's what a negative feedback looks like. It's got 27,000 reach because that's what negative feedback looks like. They really, really tell you. And there's no positive feedback on that whatsoever. So when the community hates something, they're not backwards about coming forwards. They tell you in a very, very loud voice that you can't ignore. I think it's worth giving it a crack, but it's not in my electorate, and I respect the councillors who have it in their electorate will know better than I will. And so I'm happy to defer to their wisdom and support them in their position. I've got Councillor Kerensky, then Councillor Bradley, and then I'll give one more crack to Councillor Russell at the end, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Thank you. So I don't have a trial happening in my area, so I'm just going to put my 2 cents worth in. I will defer to the area councillors because they are the ones who will be involved in the trial. But at the end of the day, I would regard a trial as a great outcome because we get to dip a toe in, but we haven't made any in-depth commitment. We have the benefit of the learnings from what's worked and what hasn't worked in Bris Vegas, and I'm sure that as this is a commercially driven company, that they'll be taking those learnings on board in a serious manner, particularly with regard to what aggrieves residents and so on. So I could say if this were in Division 4, and I unfortunately don't have the networks to support it, or perhaps it might have been, I would stand behind it and give it a crack because I'd be curious to see how it's received. We're a very young city. The average age in here, I think, is 34. So I think this is a technology that the community is likely to embrace. We have public transport challenges, and this may go some way to addressing some of those. So unless the area councillors convince me otherwise, I'll be supporting the trial.
Thank you, Councillor Kerensky. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you. As one of the area councillors, I am going to speak. Thank you. We always have had a problem in our city of the east-west connection. This is an opportunity of filling that gap. And certainly through the Springwood Summit, the connectivity was like a major, major focus. And particularly that Springwood Slacks Creek area, where a lot of the bikeways are along the Slacks Creek. I've heard a few fears of the unknown sort of comments. I've seen some of the comments on different councillors' Facebook pages where they've asked for feedback. And I think that the responses from Mr. Radich have answered a lot of those concerns. I still have an element of concern myself. However, I do feel unless you actually have a trial, you don't know. And I always go back to, in my mind, I'm, as you probably know, very passionate about public consultation. I remember consulting about a park improvement and the fear of, oh my God, you're going to remove all these trees and you're going to do this and that and that. And I'm sorry, it was just a simple little park improvement. And I listened to everyone's feedback from the squeaky wheels to the silent were the majority. And that's what you got to do. But in this scenario, it is a bit different because we don't know. You don't know unless you've actually trialled it. So this is something I think we need to step into that space of being maverick and give it a go.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Russell, then I'll put it to the vote.
Thank you so much for your indulgence. I just wanted to clarify, I probably didn't mention that versus the 28 comments, there were also 58 likes, 11 loves, and admittedly 1 angry, but it was, 1 angry. Might have been a miss hit, I don't know. But I just wanted to ask, and I have read this in the report, but I just wanted to clarify, how many vehicles or e-vehicles are we talking about here?
Through the chair, between 200 and 300 vehicles will be deployed.
Okay, thank you. So 200 and 300, and this is across actually a pretty big chunk of the city. So, and it would be very unfair for me to ask if you knew how many bicycles, e-bicycles, scooters, e-scooters were going to be purchased for Christmas this year. I know that would be an unfair question, but it's some food for thought. I just wanted to, raise this. The sky isn't falling. I think that this is an okay trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Murphy has moved the motion on the screen. Would someone like to second that motion? Thank you, Councillor Bradley. She got her hand up first. All those in favour, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That has been carried with the exception of Councillor Herrenmeyer.
Against.
And Councillor Stemp. Thank you very much. Councillors, we'll now move on to item 4.2, which is the report on the Logan Plan 2025, the year ahead. Just reminding councillors that this is a $9 million project, so I hope that we'll do 40 minutes of debate on it as well, as opposed to the free e-scooter trial that we've just spent 40 minutes on. But I'm sure that everyone's so confident in Dave's team that we won't need to delve in that far once he tells us how great it's going to be. Before I move into discussion, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest? I asked that already. Nope. Thank you. Dave, I'll now let you speak to your report. Or Christian, as it may seem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. So this presentation report today deals with the Logan Plan 2025, which Council resolved to prepare about 5 months ago. And it gives the plan for 2022. So there's a PowerPoint there. I'll step through that now. Okay. So in short, this is our plan for 2022. It does look a bit busy. That's because it will be. Fundamentally, that pink bar in the middle there really summarise what we want to do next year. We want to do some informal consultation with both community and industry. We want to inform them about the new planning scheme, do a lot of education around why good town planning is important, test some ideas, and then we want to come back to council in the second half of 2022 and get some decisions on some of those key policies. So we need to do all of that next year so that after those decisions from council are received, we can draft the first draft of the planning scheme. The reason we need to have that done largely in 2022 is simply the statutory process we need to follow to hit the goal of late 2025. So you can see that in front of you, and a critical part of that will be the statutory consultation, which we'll do in mid to late 2024. Okay, if we just come back to the present, so we're into the project now for about 5 months. We've launched a website, we've got a video up there, we've got some basic information for industry and the community in terms of what's involved and the process we're working through. We've spent a lot of time doing some recruitment, we've commissioned a lot of reports, we've put some governance structures together and industry reference groups. So we're really in the process now of trying to collect as much information as we can so that when we start next year and we start to draft the planning scheme and start to prepare the information for the community, we know exactly what bits are of the scheme that are working well. We've identified those areas which we can improve. So what will we be talking to the community about? So we prepared this graphic originally for our internal purposes. It just helped clarify what are we talking about. So critically, we're not throwing the current planning scheme out. We've got a good planning scheme that we've tweaked and amended over the 5 years we've had it. So what these pillars do, and there's 5 there, we've used those to highlight the parts of the planning scheme that we want to change or focus on. We want to make those messages really simple for people. We want them to have an educational component. So to use improving design as an example, the current planning scheme is fairly light on when it comes to the design of buildings. That's feedback we've got, I think, from within this space, from industry and the development assessment branch. So something we want to do is test the appetite in the first 6 months of next year to try to strengthen those provisions within the current planning scheme. So those pillars will allow us to really break down into specific parts the bit that we want to get people's feedback on. Importantly, the engagement we do next year, we don't have to do. It's informal engagement. We're doing it because we think it's important to engage with the community and industry early on in the project. We want to bring them along on the journey and make sure there's no surprises for them. We've got a project board, which is Councillor Raven, Councillor Stemp, Councillor Russell. Now, they've really stressed through the board meetings that we need to maintain some strong traditional methods of engagement. So we'll be going out to shopping centres, we'll be going out to libraries and making sure that we've got a presence out there for people. And in addition to that, we'll be looking at some online initiatives so that we're trying to reach a broader spectrum of the community as we can. This is a pic from a couple of weeks ago. So we sent a couple of our planners out to Beenleigh High School with Councillor Murphy. So this was a city studio initiative, and they went out there and tried to sow the seeds of why town planning is important and get the students excited about it. One of the online engagements we're investigating, and it's a bit hard to see because the picture there's really high quality, but that's actually a virtual conference room, that bottom picture. So this is an online platform we're investigating, so people can wander from store to store, a little bit like a computer game, and they can look at those information kiosks, play videos, and get information in that fashion if that's more appropriate for their circumstances. And certainly if we have another lockdown, that sort of platform will help carry those messages. To wrap it up, and this is really where you as the committee and the council come into it, we want to go out and test some ideas, float out some principles next year, but we want to bring back that feedback in about the middle of the year and say, okay, we've got to make some decisions. We've got some key policies we need you to give us guidance on. Once we've got that, we can go away and finish drafting that first draft of the planning scheme so that we can get it ready for legal review in early 23 and then off to the state government in about mid-23. Thank you very much. Appreciate your support. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Christian. I've got questions from Councillor Lane and Stemp, and Wilcox and Harrimeyer.
Good morning. Just a couple of quick questions. So how many hits have you had on the website where you're advertising this?
Through the chair, I haven't looked for several months. So can I take that on notice and provide that information?
Yeah, I'd really like that information because it leads into my next question, which is you say that you're going down into shopping centres. I was in a shopping centre with a group of people who barely had anyone coming up to them, but when their local councillor was there, all of a sudden there was activity. And being in the local libraries, it's only a limited number of people that go to the libraries. I'm just wondering whether or not you've considered advertising it in the Our Logan magazine each edition to try and get that stimulus for people to go in and actually hit on the website and put their thoughts back in.
Yes, we have the Our Logan magazine, something which we want to get into next year.
Okay, so I'm just, putting it forward that if you could put in several things. The biggest part about that is people don't understand what the changes to the planning scheme will mean for them. So putting it in very frank and easy things that we could potentially hand out when we're out in the community would be gratefully received. I know that a lot of us door knock. I know that a lot of us do community shopping centres and things like that, markets, what have you. So if there was something that we could hand out that would encourage residents to participate, then they would feel like their voices are being heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. I have Councillor Stemp, Wilcox, Harrimeyer and Bradley. Take it away, Councillor Stemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is coming together really well, which is great, and I'm looking forward to the community consultation. I guess I was just curious, how did you go in Beenleigh High School with the kids? Were they quite engaged? I'm just curious to see what that sort of age group, what their thoughts were about the whole thing, to be honest.
It worked really well. The project was to take a topic of town planning, do some research and prepare a video. So I think there's a couple of production challenges with a few of those videos, but there's one or two that we've got which we're hoping to push onto our website or the online platform, so that the kids enjoyed it.
So is there plan to do obviously a lot more in that space, I guess, across the community?
We're currently investigating another school, but if other councillors have got ideas, we'd love to do it. We've ramped up resources over the next, not just next year, but this project in terms of engagements next year. So if there's other avenues we can get out there and speak to schools or community groups, we would generally love to get it.
Thank you.
Councillor Murphy, did you want to respond to how the kids liked the visit from strategy?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, I had the pleasure of going out with the team out to Beenleigh High School. They had grade 8s. They were given a challenge, the students, of coming up with ideas for housing, disaster relief, and their thoughts were real mavericks. They were unbelievable. There was one young gentleman, Mustafa, who was absolutely amazing, and I would have encouraged him into going into a town planning career, and hopefully he can do that. His thought pattern and his thinking was well outside the square, and he came up with some brilliant ideas just by giving them a little bit of information and a bit of rapport by the teachers and the staff to help them through those processes. So our youth are definitely our future. They're the ones that are going to be designing our cities, and we should encourage them. Absolutely, 100%.
Well said, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. When you're going out and you're in the shopping centres and stuff like that, do you have a set of questions that you're going to ask people, or are you going to just go, we'd like your feedback, what would you like to see changed in the planning scheme? I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, because I know we always take on feedback, but I don't know that it's always implemented and that sort of thing, so I'm really curious.
It's a good question, and I'm happy to take feedback on that, because I think each time we do these exercises, we come away and going, what can we do to make it more efficient? We want to make it relatable, and that sounds easy, but what does that mean? So one of the concepts we're playing with is my property, my neighbourhood, my city. So we really want to produce material that is relevant. It's not academic, it's not theoretical in terms of stuff which you can't relate to or isn't involved in your day-to-day. We haven't prepared that material yet, but we will have to have it ready for February, March next year. So it'll be more around us providing educational pieces which hopefully they find interesting. People can read it and go, okay, I can now understand why some elements of town planning are important. I understand now that council is preparing a new planning scheme. So that first component of engagements is very much a general educational one, rather than asking them to provide specific feedback on the planning scheme. That'll occur in 2024 as part of the statutory consultation. We actually want to use the first 6 months to give them a bit of a foundation of understanding, so they know the questions to ask us later on down the track.
Just because I've got so much rural, and I've always got the question, I've bought out here on 2 acres purely so I could subdivide and give a half-acre block to my kids. They don't want to subdivide into 300-400 square blocks. They really don't, but they would like to actually subdivide just that half block or 2 halves, whatever, so that their kids can afford something. That's all they want, and they want this to be taken into account in this next planning scheme stage, and that sort of thing. They're sick of seeing developers come in, being able to purchase a block, and they can subdivide down into those 300-400 square blocks, and they're doing it in sometimes they seem really strange places where they're being able to do it. And yeah, they'd like to keep the rural. They just want to be able to subdivide just a little bit. Thanks.
The skinny end of the wedge. Councillor Heremiah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned a project board I'm just wanting some more information about it. If you can email me through some information, the members, the purpose, any terms of reference, that'd be really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heremiah. Councillor Bradley Kerensky-Hall.
Thank you. I do recall the last time we went through the planning scheme review, and from memory, Mr. Parks, you were here then as well. We did go out to shopping centres, and councillors had an opportunity to be there as well, from memory. Can we make sure that for next year that councillors are consulted whether they want to be included. I definitely do. And I definitely would love the idea of our high school students particularly giving feedback or being consulted or being engaged. They do have some amazing ideas that maybe we wouldn't have thought of, and certainly found that in the recent consultation for the town square. So, yeah, I just feel that we should be utilised as much as possible, and our social media as well. So any information that can be relayed to us and that we be included if we want to, that be taken on board.
Through the chair. So this is your planning scheme and these are your communities. So it is completely up to you how you'd like us to engage. You guys will be front and centre with the engagement. That's always been the plan. And we saw it with the major review of the planning scheme where we gave you social media snippets to put out to the community. Community provided feedback. We incorporated that into the planning scheme. So this is this council's planning scheme, and the engagement is so important, and whatever you means and suggestions that you have, we're happy to accommodate that.
Yeah, I suppose just my main concern is that we are given the opportunity to provide when we are available, so we can be there at the shop, rather than you saying on these days, that we are consulted as well, that we are taken on the journey too, if we want to be.
Through the chair, of course.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Kerensky.
I was just curious to know, speaking about the children and their engagement, there was a childhood summit held earlier this year. I know that Councillor Russell and I were both in attendance, and at the childhood summit they actually had 13 young speakers from across the city, and they talked about what the future of Logan would look like and that they would like to see. And at the summit they actually asked all the children who were involved to design their city from a blank canvas, and they had consultants come in and talk to them about urban design and various other things. And some of those speakers had amazing ideas about parks. So there was access and inclusion. There was a young disabled lad who was talking about that sort of stuff and so on. Have you had opportunity to plug in to the Childhood Summit and the outcomes of the Childhood Summit?
No.
Well, let me pull some stuff together. The community services team have been involved in it, but they've collated all that data from the kids and they've recorded the children's speeches and so on, and they're all Logan local kids from local schools. There were several from Councillor Stemp's area, for example, but some of the feedback was tremendous and some of their ideas were great, and some of their suggestions were just really practical and small, but I think that might support some of the consultation work that you're doing. So I'll grab that and forward it on to you.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Thank you, Councillor Kerensky. Councillor Hall.
Look, I'd just like to give kudos to the beautiful work that you're doing in terms of the engagement with the community. It's not very common that a city this size allows residents to have as much say as what they do in terms of our planning scheme and what we do. Some of the programs that you have, such as City Studios, they're unprecedented, and it's great because it brings the younger generation along through the journey, and through some of those programs that we've had, I've had the opportunity to meet students, and it's come about that I've formed friendship with this younger generation. Sometimes they email me, and I even get invites to parties which I often turn down because they're often past my bedtime. But yeah, I'd like to follow on upon what Lisa was saying, is that, I'd like to know, whenever an opportunity comes up where I can engage, I'll be there. I'll try and be there. That's what councillors are all about. And I think you'll find that you will get a lot more candid information when a councillor is involved, because, we quite often have the ability to get the real thing that our residents want to relay to council, because it's quite often the case that many people don't want to upset the apple cart, but they're happy to do it when they're next to a councillor who's, they know very well and they trust. And that's really what we're trying to do with this, is build trust within the community and let them have an honest say on the direction that it goes. So, kudos to you guys. You do great work. I don't think we've got a better man for the job than David Rading and his team in terms of getting these out.
Well said, Councillor Hall. I'll just wrap up with a couple of questions. So just teeing off what Councillor Bradley and Hall were referring to, if councillors have mobile offices, will they be able to invite the planning team to come and attend with them? Yep, and you're going to give us enough.
Yes, through the chair,
I saw a nod from Christian. I'll take a nod. I'll take body language. That's fine. And then, and when you've got planner in the park, planner in the centre, you'll give councillors plenty of notice so they can make it work in their diaries wherever possible.
Most definitely.
Excellent. I've asked this on the in the board meetings, but the community vision panel that we use for the community visioning process, who are essentially a large focus group of residents who are already educated about how council works in relation to other levels of government, and I believe they provided quite a bit of planning related feedback as part of the community visioning. Are we going to re-engage with them as part of the informal consultation?
Through the chair, happy to do that.
That'd be awesome, because where you've got all that energy and effort was put in by the community engagement team and the community services team to really bring those people up to speed on what council does and where it does it. It just seems like they're a great asset that we should keep tapping. And I guess my last point was for councillors. Dave said something very relevant, which is that this is your planning scheme. So at the moment, there was a previous council, of which the only two that are left are Councillor Bradley and the Mayor, who voted on the current planning scheme in 2015 and 2014. And so it's not really our planning scheme. We've amended it in that time, and so we've got, and that's basically to try to close loopholes and improve it as best we could. But once you cross this threshold, it will be your planning scheme, because I expect most of you, if not all of you, will be re-elected next term, and there won't be the ability to say, hey, we didn't do that. You'll actually have to take ownership of it, and that means that the more energy you put into engaging with your community, the more feedback that you get, the more proactive you are, the better outcome you will get from the planning scheme, and the easier it will be for you to both say you're proud of it and defend it when challenges come up. So I just really want to encourage you to take every opportunity you can, and if anything, like DAs get attention, like development applications get attention when people don't like them. I just want nothing but boring DAs for the next 20 years of council, where everything just goes through quietly because the community expects it to be there and understands why it is there, and the stuff that they don't like, we have the capacity to refuse it. And if we do a good job with the planning scheme, we'll be in that place for the next 20 years. So please engage, do everything you can. It is well worth your time and effort. It does take a lot of extra energy, though, I completely accept that, but it is discretionary effort that I think you'll find very rewarding. Would anyone like to move? Thank you, Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Bradley. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that has been carried unanimously. Great work, gentlemen. Councillors, that is the last report for the Economic Development and Strategy Manager. Dave, do you have any general business for us?
No, I do not.
I know we've got general business for you. Councillor Heremiah and Councillor Bennon. Councillor Heremiah, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today I have a general business motion regarding electric vehicles, and quite an exciting motion with electric vehicles, and it's all about figuring out what council can do to work with developers to support more electric vehicle charging points. Now, this follows some big news, some big international news. Recently, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, announced that new homes, supermarkets and workplaces will be required to install electric vehicle charging points as standard from 2022. Now, that's happening internationally, and here, what this motion's all about is asking the Minister to clarify and to explicitly reference the role of local governments in facilitating the uptake of electric vehicles through the development of charging infrastructure in private developments. So this motion isn't about making any significant changes. All this motion's about is asking the Mayor, when he gets back from or maybe the acting Mayor, to send a letter to the Minister and asking him to consider amending the state planning policy to reference the role of local government planning schemes. Now, in Queensland, we have fewer than 300 public charging sites. Victoria has more than 350, and New South Wales has more than 500. And the reason why we need to get up to par with New South Wales and why we need to install more public charging sites is because every single day we're seeing more and more electric vehicles on our roads. Since 2018, electric vehicle sales have tripled, and the Electric Vehicle Council has stressed that even though sales have increased so much, the only way they're going is up. Right now, around 1% of new light vehicle sales are electric vehicles. In Norway, 70% of sales are electric vehicles. So we're only going to get more and more on our roads, and we need to make sure that charging infrastructure is available. And a great opportunity to build that charging infrastructure is by working with private developments to put those charging points in. So I'm going to read out the motion. The motion is that the Mayor be requested to write to the Honourable Dr. Stephen Miles, MP, Deputy Premier, Minister for State Development, Infrastructure, Local Government and Planning, and the Minister assisting the Premier on Olympics infrastructure, asking that the state government consider amending the state planning policy to explicitly reference the role of local government planning schemes in facilitating the uptake of electric vehicles through the development of charging infrastructure in private developments. So this motion's about asking the Mayor to write to the Minister. I think this will be an interesting letter, and I really look forward to see what happens. And hopefully in the future we'll see more and more electric vehicle charging points being built in our city. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harrimeyer. Councillor Bradley, is that a question for or a comment for this?
Question, if I may, not specifically about this, but related to this.
Can we just address this motion first, and then I'll put you down as a GB after that? Councillor Hall?
Yeah, I'd just like to advise to Councillor Harrimeyer that Norway also has a massively robust e-scooter economy as well. I find it slightly contradictory that you'd be not supportive of e-scooters in Logan, but supportive of electric cars. They're kind of part and parcel. They work together because they draw energy from the same source, essentially.
You can, actually. That's an ordinary council that you're thinking of, Councillor Hall. Councillor Harrimeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would recommend that Councillor Hall launches the YouTube app on his phone and actually listens to what I said in the speech. And I think I mentioned 3 or 4 times how supportive I am of e-mobility. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harrimeyer. We have a motion on the screen. Councillor Harrimeyer has moved. Would someone like to second that motion? Thank you. Oh, Councillor Bennon's into the fray. He put his hand up. No, Councillor Bradley put her hand up. All those seconded by Councillor Bradley. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been moved, carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Councillor Harrimeyer. For GB, I still have Councillor Bennon and then Councillor Bradley. I don't mind. It's a separate matter that's related. It's not on the motion, so we'll go in the order.
You know it's important, Mr.
I know it's not often because you haven't pressed your button.
Oh. Yeah, it's not very often, and plus I've written notes, so you know it's important to me. I just wanted to touch base on the End-All DV event that the ED&S team helped me deliver on our annual End-All DV Day on November the 22nd. I just wanted to thank Director David Hanson, David Radish and his team, Ella, Johnny, Olga and Rebecca, who as usual went above and beyond to deliver the first bench of its kind. Mr. Chair, this is an idea of how much support the event raised. We had Councillors Karen Murphy, Councillor Wilcox, Councillor Fraser, Councillor Hall, Councillor Bradley, Deputy Mayor John Raven. I received apologies from all the councillors that couldn't attend. I even had the amazing Deputy Mayor Nicole Johnny. She crossed the border to attend the event. The federal member sent 3 of his staff down because he was stuck in Canberra. I had the police domestic violence staff, the ambulance, quota, Rotary, fireys, Father Dan from the church, the principal of the Hills College, plus I had the rest of my community come along. I was lucky enough to have Councillor Bradley, who I thank you, and Deputy Mayor John Raven were kind enough to speak on the day as well. And speaking for myself, I need to have a fair bit of trust with the people that I work with. Otherwise, everything just goes really slow because I'm second guessing everything that you do. That's just the way that I run my business. It's the way that I run my life. And when you do things like that and you have trust, some great things can happen. And your team, sir, have 110% trust from me, and you always will. And as far as I'm concerned, your team is the gold standard in this entire organisation. Happy to put it out there. But I just want to let you guys know something really cool, and the councillor team. So we did the bench on the Monday. On the Friday of that same week, a domestic violence victim who'd been abused for a long time saw the media from our bench. And not from our media because they didn't go. The media they seen got him, he got abused, he contacted the local police station, and within 30 minutes, here's the cool part of him getting to the police station, we had him in domestic violence accommodation, safe, with support. So the part that I think needs to sink in, and the part that you guys and your team have done, is that bench has already saved someone's life. That's saved a DV victim already, within 5 days. We've had 3 calls this week from seeing that media on that bench. So if we didn't do that, and you didn't help me with your team, that DV victim could still be getting abused or worse today. So thank you, not just for doing your job, but for having my back, for trusting me that I know my community, for knowing that what I knew was important became important to you. Thank you for standing strong and not letting agendas get in the way of doing the right thing by people that need help, people that need a voice. And that's why anything I do that involves anything to do with your team, I'm instantly relaxed and excited because I know I'm working with professionals and professionals that go above and beyond for our community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett, and we know how passionate you are about that subject, and we know how passionate that the Director and his team are about supporting councillors when they care deeply about a matter. Great work to the team, well done. That's some pretty high standards there, the gold standard. You just put a big target on the Director and the team's back, Councillor Bennett. He's used to it though, I think. Councillor Bradley, your general business.
Thank you. That's a hard act to follow, and I think you should put that up on your Facebook, by the way. Oh gosh, I've lost my train of thought. The electric vehicles. I had a conversation with Mick Dabrini, who's the state member for Springwood, but also the e-vehicles fall under his portfolio as a minister. So I'm just curious, in the planning scheme, is there any ability to plan for these e-vehicles somewhere on our streets, for example, where people can be charged to charge their vehicles or whatever? I don't know. Is there any ability, or is there any research that has been done to incorporate that? Because obviously it's a moving thing at the moment and it's the way of the future, but that's what a planning scheme is all about, the future. So
Through the Chair, yes, Councillor Bradley. With the Logan Plan 2025, one of the studies which we have commissioned is a review of the Service Access and Parking Code. The standards in that are fairly conventional, fairly old-fashioned, so we want to update that, look at some of the initiatives which have emerged in the last few years, the last decade, particularly around electric vehicles and the infrastructure needed to support them. So that's something we are investigating currently, and happy to keep you in the loop as we find information on that.
I'd appreciate it, and I don't know if there's any companies that have set up already to be like, instead of paying for parking meters, you're paying for charge your car or whatever. I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. And the timing of the new planning scheme with some of the megatrend advice that we received last week around 2027 being when e-vehicles become cost comparable to running a standard internal combustion engine fits very well with our planning scheme becoming active in 2025 and being around for 10 years. Councillor, is there any further general business? There being none, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 5.1. Thank you, Director Hanson. We'll just wait for the Director for ICT, for Innovation and City Transformation, to come in, Dr. Scott Burke, and for Kirsten Pietzner to speak to their report, which is Council's response to the Senate Committee report on Inland Rail. All good. Under Councillors, before I open discussions, does anyone have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare? There being none, welcome to the floor, Kirsten and Zane. And the director has indicated that you'll be speaking to the report, Kirsten, so take it away.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Through you, Mr Chair, the Senate Committee report on the management of the Inland Rail project was tabled in August 2021. While the report indicated that senators were supportive of the project overall, the report highlighted fundamental concerns. In particular, it questioned the validity of the 2015 business case for the project on the basis that there are continuing questions surrounding the suitability of Acacia Ridge as the end terminal. The report highlighted that although Acacia Ridge has been named as the end terminal of the Inland Rail project in southeast Queensland, this decision has not yet been finalised, with Brummelton, Acacia Ridge, Ebenezer and 2 sites in Toowoomba all under consideration as the end terminal. The identification of Acacia Ridge as the Queensland end terminal is primarily due to its potential to link to the Port of Brisbane. However, parallel to the Senate Committee's deliberations, alternatives to the Acacia Ridge Port of Brisbane link have been put forward. These include a link from Toowoomba to the Port of Gladstone, which the federal government has since committed up to $10 million for a business case, as well as a tunnel linking from an inland port in Ebenezer, which is located west of Ipswich, to the Port of Brisbane. This has been termed the Port Connects proposal. Additionally, the Senate Committee report identified Brummelton as the best greenfield site for future expansion as a logistics and freight precinct for Brisbane and the Gold Coast. As Brummelton is located just south of Logan, expansion of this site could have significant implications for the city. Given ongoing doubts regarding the suitability of Acacia Ridge as the end terminal for Inland Rail, the advocacy program recommends that Council advocate for an open, transparent and rigorous investigation of alternatives. And we further recommend that Council formally opposes the construction of the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge link of the Inland Rail project until these alternatives are properly investigated and the findings publicly released and evaluated.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. I have questions from Councillor Heremiah and Wilcox.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I have some questions regarding the attachment of this report. After page 6 of the report, there's an attachment called Key Recommendations of the Senate report, and on the last page of that attachment, it states regarding planning for the future transport needs of Greater Flagstone that the federal government provides $750,000 in grant funding to Logan City Council to support transport planning in relation to the interaction between future transport demand, road and bridge infrastructure, and the railway corridor over the next, and then it has a full stop. Is that the full sentence, or am I missing something? Thank you, Mr Chair.
It was supposed to be over the next 20 years. Our copy and paste didn't copy and paste completely by the looks of it. Apologies for that.
Thank you for that. And this is some serious stuff. This is a huge project, and it's also about making sure that we treat all stakeholders in an appropriate way. So on page 1 of that attachment, it states that Council's adopted advocacy solution in one of these rows here states that the Australian Rail Track Corporation is required to mitigate all environmental impacts, including air, noise and vibration, and that these impacts are assessed using methodologies that account for long-term impacts. For example, the impact on nearby housing of increased vibration over time. I wanted to ask, has that sentence and that intent been considered by any council governance or legal experts? Because that is quite an expansive thing to say in a document.
The quote that you've made is the council's advocacy position. That was the resolution that was passed, or the motion that was passed by council. It's basically saying to mitigate all the environmental impacts, and it's listed some of the examples that council has observed or residents have put forward. And yes, their environmental impact statement processes are very expensive in terms of what they should be looking at. So I don't have an issue with what that recommendation states. When it says mitigate, though, that's where the discussion would have to be about what is practicable and reasonable in terms of mitigation measures. But you should understand what all of the potential impacts are.
Thank you for that. And practicality and being reasonable is very important. That's on the basis that I will be making my decision on this based on how to be reasonable towards different stakeholders in an issue as important as this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Herrenmeyer. Councillor Wilcox.
Thanks. Okay, so I have a fair bit to get through. I think as a council, we need to be brave. And as Councillor Hall likes to say, I think we need to be mavericks with this. I don't like Inland Rail. I don't want it coming through Logan, full stop, bang. That's it. I don't want it coming down off Toowoomba. And I think we need to take a stand and we need to state a clear position from council that we don't want to see Inland Rail coming through Logan. We don't want to see K2 ARB, full stop, bang. Barnaby Joyce recently said, lock in Gladstone. Well, let's lock in Gladstone and let's not have it come through Logan down to Acacia Ridge. Acacia Ridge is landlocked, it's roadlocked, it's not going to work. The fact is the project started at, I don't know, $5 billion. It's now at $10 billion, then it's gone to $14 billion. If they want to tunnel from Ebenezer to Acacia Ridge or to the port, I don't even want to know how many billions of dollars that's going to push this out to, and then take away a couple of billion because you're not going to run it down over the range. Great, you're not saving that much money. That's not even ratepayers' money, that's taxpayers' money. I'm a taxpayer, I don't want to fund it. I don't want it coming through Logan. There's no advantage to us getting it, except for the fact that it's going to harm a lot of residents that are along that line. And I'm one of those residents as well. So I've got a stake in this game, just as much as anyone else that's going to live in Flagstone. And there's 130,000 people that are going to live in Flagstone that are going to be affected by this because they're going to live on top of this rail line. This is not something that we should promote. We should be mirroring our community's feelings, and they don't want it. I'm constantly told they don't want it. And the fact is, we had a briefing on this. We had 3 options provided to us in our briefing papers. When we went to the briefing, we had 5 options. By the time this came out, we were back to 1. I've got it back up to 2, but I still don't like the options. We are basically still, the options that are on here for me, they're still so opaque that we're almost condemning what's going to happen. We're almost saying it's okay. The federal government, they can be open, transparent and rigorous in their investigations. They should be. We shouldn't have to put it in here. They should already be doing this. Why are we putting this in here? Morally and ethically, this is wrong. The Prime Minister was recently in Glasgow for the Climate Change Summit. Heaps of other countries around the world are now trying to, or they're accelerating the phase down of coal, yet we seem to be pushing it through the major cities. I don't understand why. And he himself has said that we are going to transition out of the use of coal. And fair enough, it's going to happen over a very long period of time. But other countries are trying to phase it out. So surely, by the time this project is coming through, when the federal government is saying that it's coming through for coal and grocery to come through, I would hope that coal would have dropped off by then. I hope that we're actually not going to run it through the major cities. If we do have coal, use the existing lines that are there, create the network that is needed, get it to Gladstone. So go border to Gladstone, push it from Toowoomba up to Gladstone, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper for the ratepayer. I really don't understand why we're asking ratepayers and taxpayers to suck this up. I would like to see the support of my fellow councillors to take a stand and to say, we don't want it coming through K2 ARB, we don't want it coming through Logan, full stop, bang. And I would really like to see the options change so that reflects it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. There were some alternative motions proposed. I've got the current motion on the screen at the moment, and the one that's relevant, I believe, to Councillor Wilcox is the one that's been highlighted. That says council opposes the construction of the Kagru to Acacia Ridge component of K2ARB until these alternatives are properly investigated and findings publicly released and evaluated. So the problem that you've got with is that we put a condition being that until you've actually investigated the alternative options, you just wanted to say council opposes the construction of K2ARB. I hear Councillor Jeremiah's commentary that having like a hard no with no release point could be perceived as unreasonable, but there are some alternative measures, alternative motions that were provided to the team. Do you have those that we could see them, please? So there's two optional alternatives that have been recommended. Option one is that council advocates that the federal government undertakes an open, transparent and rigorous investigation of alternatives for the K to ARB component of the inland rail route. Especially, although I think it's meant to be specifically, such investigation should examine alternatives to Acacia Ridge as the terminus of the inland rail project in southeast Queensland, with these alternatives to include private sector proposals as detailed in the report. The option two is similar, but it names those alternatives, including one of the combination of terminating the line at Brommelton, constructing a link between Toowoomba and the Port of Gladstone, and constructing a tunnel between Ebenezer and the Port of Brisbane, as detailed in the report. I'm not a huge fan of a 50-kilometre tunnel that runs beneath our city, and I suspect that somehow we'd be asked to contribute to that. So my preference is not to list specific alternatives, but I'm comfortable with hardening the language to specifically say that Acacia Ridge as the terminus of inland, Acacia Ridge as the terminus of inland rail isn't viable, and alternatives should be considered. But I'm in your hands, councillors, with what you'd like to put forward.
I think you've got to take out the federal government undertakes open, transparent and rigorous investigation. They should be doing it full stop bang. I don't even know why it's in there.
Because they're not. So, and you want to see them do those investigations because that's the step that leads to them changing their position. Hands gone up all over the place. I'll go Fraser, Bannon, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I guess what you said, Mr. Chair, just put that up and we'll see how it reads and we can talk about it then maybe. Is that okay?
So, my alternative is in option one, which is as it stands at the moment, except the second sentence from where it says especially.
So we've changed it to specifically?
No, it says specifically such investigations should examine alternatives to the Acacia Ridge terminus as it is not viable. After South East Queensland say as it is not viable.
Yep. Hang on, the council advocates federal government undertakes.
Full stop.
You're lucky wordy sentences there.
These?
Yeah. And then, yep, so you want to chuck that up on the screen. I'll just put this up on the screen. It's just a draft. Feel free to chop it up. Councillor Bannon.
The director's forgotten about advocacy than I know, so I'd like to get an opinion from the director or from these guys on how they think it should be worded, knowing what we've said today.
Thank you, Councillor Bannon. Through the chair. My own view sits somewhere in between the views that have been expressed. I do concur with the chair that a simpler and more straightforward recommendation is more likely to be comprehensible, I think, to the public, as well as makes it easier for us to construct an advocacy strategy around. My view would be the simpler and more straightforward we can make the recommendation, the easier it will be for us to action it through the advocacy program.
Is that how you'd word it, that's up there now?
My only concern with assessments around viability that's going to be fairly difficult, I would have thought, to be able to establish at this particular point in time, because it almost presumes that there's been an assessment that's been undertaken in the first instance. It's a view that potentially council can hold that a solution is unviable, but it seems fairly difficult to me that we can make that a position in advance of the assessment being undertaken, if that makes sense. There's a logical inconsistency there. I can understand the view that exists, and in other words, if we were to frame it as council's view, then that's different to a blanket statement that a particular approach is unviable, if that makes sense. So I'd suggest that you either couch it in terms of council's view, or you dial it back in terms of the actual specifics of the statement around the viability, if that makes sense.
Councillor Lane. While I continue to work on this.
Thanks very much through you, Mr Chair. The Council advocates that the federal government engages key stakeholders in an open, transparent and rigorous investigation of alternatives to the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge and Brommelton component of the Inland Rail route. Specifically, such investigation should examine alternatives to the Acacia Ridge terminus of the inland project.
Councillor Lane, I'm happy for you to keep doing that, but you cannot have a full stop in a clause. So if you're going to put a full stop for the end of a sentence, you've got to start a new clause, and then it's got to start with the word that.
Well, what does it start with specifically?
Because that is like a not.
It's the end of a full. It's the end of a sentence.
That was just a draft. It's not what we can vote on.
Right.
It's not a properly constructed motion. So I've got your first part is fine. Engages with yada yada yada. You just need a second clause that then goes something along the lines of the council's view is that da 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 da.
So you got it then?
No, it's not ready yet.
Didn't know it either.
Do you want to keep riffing on the second sentence, assuming we start with that? And
You
just
ruined my
keep going
chi,
from there?
Mr Chair.
Sorry, I
You ruined my
ruined your
chi.
flow, councillor. I didn't mean to ruin your flow.
So that such investigation should examine alternatives to Acacia Ridge, to the Acacia Ridge terminus of the Inland Rail project, as it is not viable. We already know it's in southeast Queensland. That these alternatives to include private sector proposals as detailed in the report of the Director of Innovation. I think the biggest part about this is we actually need to include the key stakeholders as part of this. We are a key stakeholder, Brisbane City Council is a key stakeholder, and certainly the businesses along that route are key stakeholders. Residents are represented by us, so they're covered in that key stakeholder process. I think that the environmental groups are key stakeholders in this process, so putting key stakeholders is important. That's just my view.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. We're just chucking some magic. It's got some ones and twos in it at the moment. We'll continue to modify those, but it'll put it up there so you can read it.
I'm just going to add my 2 bobs worth in. The only other thing that I was thinking of is, could we add that the council advocates that the federal government terminates the line at Toowoomba and then undertakes open, transparent, yada, yada, yada.
I don't know if you've got support to terminate it at Toowoomba when terminating at Brommelton benefits the city's economy far more.
But you're still bringing it down off the range.
Yes, but what we want is not to go through Logan. I'm happy to test support, but I don't think you'll get popular support for stopping at the range when Brommelton could create jobs for people living in Logan.
If we're bringing
Councillor
it down
Hammer.
off the range, I'd rather it go through a tunnel through Ebenezer.
It's not the Councillor Wilcox show, it's the Council of City Logan show. So. Councillor Hammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What Councillor Lane said earlier about stakeholders is so right, because we have a lot of stakeholders with a project that is as important as this. And what we have in front of us is we're writing motions in committee, which is never the best way to do it. We have a report with missing information and typos. I think the best thing we should do is put this on hold, get the interested councillors to go and talk to the stakeholders to go and really come back with a fully baked strategy, because if we want to get the best outcome for our city, we need to make sure we do it right. I don't think we're doing it right now. I think we can in the future, but I think we need to go back, take it offline for a bit and come back later with all of our, what's the term? All of our pins in a line or something like that. Ducks in a row, that's the one. We need to come back later once everything's figured out and once we have a proper strategy, because I'm never a fan of writing motions as we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I appreciate what you enjoy and don't enjoy, Councillor Herrmeyer. If the committee wants to craft a motion that reflects their views, they're more than welcome to. And it was pretty common last term to do it that way, because sometimes the report has the information you need. Thank you, Councillor Kerensky, I've got you. The report has the information you need, but the recommendation doesn't reflect the view of council. And that's where you modify the view until it does. If councillors want to defer for another 2 months, because that's how long it'll be before it comes back here, that's 2 months more of silence. When the Senate inquiry was finished in
August.
So that will be 6 months, doing my maths quickly on the fly, by the time that we consider it, with complete silence from council, which could be perceived as silence being consent. So, and I don't want anyone to think that we're consenting to what's going on with Inland Rail. So if councillors want to defer, happy to see that be tested. And I'd also like to test the idea that Councillor Wilcox put forward, that we specifically say we'd like to see it terminated at Toowoomba rather than having it open as to where it gets terminated. I'll test both ideas. One is a specific terminus. One is just saying Acacia Ridge is bad, don't terminate it there and don't go through our city, please. I've got Councillor Hall and Councillor Kerensky. And then I'll test those two alternatives with a show of objections. Councillor Lane.
Does anyone in this room actually believe that this response is going to change this in any way, shape or form? We might as well just be writing a letter to Kissinger's cat.
Yeah, cool. Let's do nothing then. Let's just do nothing.
I do believe that they're listening, but they're not hearing. They're not hearing the community.
And that's what the Senate report said.
Yeah. The Senate report agrees with you, Councillor Hall. Thank you. Councillor Kerensky, then Lane, then Bannon, then I'll test the two alternatives that Councillor Wilcox has put forward.
Thank you. Firstly, a couple of quick comments. I was very actively involved in an advocacy campaign before I got elected with Logan City Council that Councillor Bradley would recall, and it was actually in opposition to a power line proposal along the Logan River. And had this council, our predecessors, not actually stood behind that, we wouldn't have got the outcomes that we did. So in the first instance, as much as I hear Councillor Hall's frustration, and it sometimes seems like we can't achieve anything and we're not going anywhere, were it not for that advocacy campaign, we wouldn't have got the outcomes that we did. So I applaud the area councillor for hanging in there when it's tough. But I also acknowledge Councillor Herrmeyer's comments, and I do think we do have one other alternative. We have Ordinary Council next week. So if there was a decision to defer today to Ordinary Council to enable those recommendations to be tightened up so they clearly say exactly what we want them to say and we're not doing ad hoc on the run stuff, I'm supportive of that too, because I do think we want to put our best foot forward. So if there is an appetite to, I know the Mayor's not here today, he'll be back for Ordinary Council. He'll be back for Ordinary Council. If there's an appetite to delay to Ordinary Council, I would support that also.
Thank you, Councillor Kerensky, Councillor Lane, Bannon, and I'm going to test the ideas, including deferral to Ordinary Council.
Thanks very much. One thing that it doesn't say is it doesn't say that Logan opposes it coming through our area.
The original one did though. We could bring that back.
But this one doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm just making the point that in nowhere does it say that Logan opposes Inland Rail either having a port in a terminus in our area, that it should be canned before it hits Logan's boundaries.
The second one.
The second one from the original. Thank you, Councillor Lane. It's a good point. Okay, so I have Councillor Bannon, then I'll test the ideas. And then I've got Councillor Bradley if he still gets there.
One's a question too. How important is it to get the wording right? Because I know that we've got councillors chucking their opinions in on wording, but these guys are the experts in wording it for advocacy and they need to know what they can advocate for. So if you get the wording wrong, I guess it's a question to you guys. If we get the wording wrong a little bit, is that a really bad thing? Or should you guys, understanding what we've said, to say, okay, this is how it should be written? Is this making it harder for you or easier?
I think the suggestions that have been made would strengthen the recommendation, particularly Councillor Lane's suggestion of engaging stakeholders. in the open and transparent rigorous investigation of alternatives. The comment that came from the director regarding the viability of Acacia Ridge, if you wanted to be careful in the wording, you might say, as council believes it is not viable. And then you would have the recommendation that is drafted here, the reason why we came up with alternatives was because we had feedback that our original recommendation was too vague, and therefore community wouldn't necessarily understand what council's position was. So this is really about trying to clarify for the point of view of the community. It doesn't really change the intent of the recommendation that we had previously made. So by putting in place the feedback from councillors, as has been given today, I think you've clarified for the community what it is that council's view is, without really substantially changing the intent behind the original recommendation.
Cool. I'm happy to support as long as you guys are happy with the way it's worded, because I know Nat pretty well, and if anyone thinks that that's going to go away, you're dreaming. So yeah, happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. That's Councillor Nat in committee. Thank you. The ideas I'm going to test. So there's a motion on the screen now that incorporates that is the feedback from Councillor Lang, which it says it didn't state that we oppose it. That is from the original recommendation. So that is word for word what the officers originally had. Then clauses 2 and 3 are the ones that have been changed. Councillor Wilcox's suggestion is that we add a specific terminus point rather than just saying not Acacia Ridge and not through Logan. We add a specific terminus point. Is there support to add a specific terminus point?
Look, I'm okay not to add it, but I still think in number 1, and you've got to remember, you guys supported me to go to Mackay and to go and talk to all the other councillors and mayors. I spoke to Banana, Gladstone, Goondiwindi, Western Downs, Lockyer, Logan, Brisbane City Council, and a bunch of others. I went there and I spoke to them, and I've got their support. We need to be mavericks. We need to go out there. We need to stand on a ledge, because that's basically what I'm doing at the moment. I'm standing on a ledge and I'm out there on my own. If we take a stand, hopefully the rest of them will follow suit and take a stand with us. Hopefully then, all of us together have enough clout to actually do something and stop something. Now, I would propose that in number 1, it says that the council opposes the construction of the K2 ARB, the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge component of K2RB. I'd take that out and I'd just put council opposes the K2 ARB, saying full stop bang. I don't want to see it until the alternatives are investigated, because that's almost putting a clause in there to say it's okay that once everything's investigated, that it can still come through. Oh, it's okay, we've gone and investigated everything else. Oh, there's no other alternative. Let's just put it through there. They'll calm down. We'll go give them what they want. We'll just push it through. So for me, that is not okay.
So I'll just test that one to just arbitrarily say no K to ARB, and this may not go in today's motion if you decide to defer, but I will use the sentiment expressed here to go towards what is crafted if you defer to ordinary council. So do you want to see it say full stop, no investigations, just we oppose K to ARB?
Yes.
You do? So I'm getting nods? Nods? I'm getting an objection over here? Yep, so I've got 1 objection, 2 objections. I've got 2 objections, silence, and a whole bunch of nods. So I'm going to say that's a yes, shorten that clause up. And that was the only proposal you had because you were happy to remove the specific terminus. You just wanted it to be very hard on that language point. Feedback from staff on that adjustment?
I just would note that the K2RB link is Kangaroo to Brommelton and Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge. So if you say that the council opposes K2RB, you are also opposing Kangaroo to Brommelton, not just the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge link. And it's important that you take that into account.
I would be happy to remove the B, because otherwise it's still coming down off the mountain. If we can remove K2ARB,
Councillor Bradley, if you'd like to chair the meeting, you're welcome to. I'm happy to remove the Brommelton. And this, as I said, councillors, if you want to polish it, you may just get to a point where you're pretty close, but you want to test it for a week. But I'd rather, while we're all in the room and we're all hearing the same information at the same time, we get as close as possible to finish as we can, because otherwise it will be a series of emails for the next week, trying to get it down to the final agreement, and then we'll do more of this in ordinary council. So I'd rather do it in committee as close as we can, and if we have to defer, we'll defer. I've got Kirsten and then Councillor Kerensky, then Councillor Fraser.
Sorry, just further to the point regarding the Brommelton link. If you were to keep it to the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge link, you are much more likely to get support from other South East Queensland councils, particularly through ComSec. If you take out the Brommelton link, obviously that then affects Scenic Rim. And therefore our likelihood of being able to engage other councils, there's then sort of conflict, I guess, amongst South East Queensland councils in regards to that particular recommendation. I note that for councillors, but it is still up to you as to which position you wish to take.
Councillor Kerensky, then Councillor Fraser.
I appreciate what you're trying to achieve, Mr Mayor, and I value the advice of the officers. I'm somewhat ambivalent at this stage. I regret that the Mayor isn't here because ultimately he is going to have to be the champion of this, and he's going to have to be the one that's out there carrying the flag together with the divisional councillors. So when we get to a point, whatever that point might be, I would still like to defer to ordinary council because I'd like to hear what the Mayor's got to say. So my vote today may actually not reflect my ultimate vote. I just want to find more information yet.
Understand, Councillor Kerensky, and I'll test the option to defer once we get close to completion. Councillor Fraser, then Councillor Stemp, did you have your vote? No? Okay.
Thank you, Mr Chair. So yeah, I'd be voting to defer, and we're getting close. I think what Kirsten said was good. However, I'm wondering, Nat, Councillor Wilcox, sorry, what did all the other people at what's it called again? The LGAQ say where was their preference for it to terminate at?
So with discussions with Banana, Gladstone, Goondiwindi, Western Downs, they are keen to get it Toowoomba to Gladstone, or I hate to say it, even the thought of going border to Gladstone and bypassing Toowoomba and just putting a spur line into Toowoomba. With conversations with Lockyer, because they are in between us and Toowoomba, they don't want to see it come down. So if we are still saying, yes, it's okay to bring it down to Brommelton, well, it's still coming. It still means, you know, with some of those options, there's still a chance that it's going to come through Logan. If they're going to build it that far, they may as well terminate it at Acacia Ridge and then put another intermodal at Brommelton. They will just split it up. That's all they will do. What is the point of bringing it all of that way and then having a terminus at Brommelton? There's still a train line then coming up to Acacia Ridge. All they would have to do is add a curve in. That's it. Look, Brommelton's there at the moment. It works at the moment. Status quo is fine. Or you bring the trains, you bring a couple of extra trains up. There's 8 trains a day, roughly, that come up on that line at the moment. They can build into Brommelton now. They just bring them up and they terminate them at Brommelton.
Councillors, you've got a dry motion on the screen, which I'm happy for you to defer if you feel this is close. You could vote for it if you feel it's spot on. If you just take a moment to read it, or I'll read it out for you. The council advocates that the federal government undertakes open, transparent, rigorous investigation of alternatives to the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge component of the Inland Rail route, which addresses Councillor Heremeyer's concerns that we've been too arbitrary, and we still want them to investigate alternatives because we don't think they're doing it at the moment. That such investigations as detailed above should examine alternatives to Acacia Ridge as the terminus of the Inland Rail project, as council believes it is not viable. That council opposes the construction of the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge component of K2 ARB until these alternatives are properly investigated and the findings publicly released and evaluated, yada, yada, yada. I suspect that Councillor Wilcox's preference is that we remove the until aspect and just says we oppose the Kangaroo to Acacia Ridge component of K2. Is that correct? Understood. And we'll put that to the test through an email because that's one thing. So councillors generally happy with that and just want to polish it for the week and then bring it back to ordinary council once the mayor's had a chance to look. I'm seeing head nods. Yes. I'm seeing death stares from Councillor Bradley. She's giving me the serious face. Councillor Hall, and then I'll wrap it up.
Councillor Benton was actually correct. It was Schrodinger's cat, not Kissinger's cat.
Schrodinger's cat.
What is it?
Schrodinger.
Schrodinger's cat. Yeah.
Schrodinger's.
Like we sometimes it's like we don't even know if the cat's alive or dead in this box that we're sending this letter to. So
Please, Councillor Hall, move on. Oh, there we go. We're good. That's all we were talking about. So, councillors, first I'll test if someone wants to move the motion as it stands on the board. Given that has failed, we'll move to defer the motion to ordinary council with this as a draft to be circulated to councillors for feedback and consideration. Would someone like I'll give them, there we go, ordinary council. That's been moved by Councillor Wilcox, seconded by Councillor Heremiah. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Good work, councillors. Councillors, that is the end of the advocacy program leaders. No, it's not. Telefit. Councillors, we'll now move on to item 5.2, which is the state and federal budget government pre-budget submissions for 2022-2023. Before we open discussions on this item, do any councillors have any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare at this time? There being none, I note that this is a confidential report and it's considered necessary to take the discussion of this report into a closed session as the confidential attachments contain information regarding projects that are funded at the discretion of the Commonwealth and the local government's budgets. Do any councillors wish to move into closed session to discuss this item, noting that you do not have to? No? Excellent. Kirsten, would you like to speak to the open sections of the report? Are you happy to take it as read and put it to the vote?
The only observation I would make, Mr Chairman, about this report is it's probably the pre-budget submissions are probably more important than we had originally envisaged, simply by virtue of the timing now that is likely in relation to the federal government. And that's effectively what has happened is that the federal government has put out a parliamentary timetable bringing forward its budget, bringing down its budget in March. That's what the timetable is indicating, which means that these pre-budget submissions may therefore be effectively a mini election campaign to influence the federal budget decision. That's the only additional element, I guess.
Does that feedback change any councillor's position want to go into confidential? I feel we had a pretty robust, we provided robust feedback on this one when it was asked through briefings. Councillor Bradley?
Yeah, through the chair, I'm just conscious that maybe what I could say could be confidential. So, yeah, I would like to go into confidential, probably.
Or do you want to move
And
to confidential?
I don't want to get myself in trouble, so I'll move it.
Councillor Bradley has moved. Councillor Lane has seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand to move into confidential under section. That is carried unanimously. Oh, sorry. Who said no? Sorry, bro. That was Councillor Bannon and Councillor Heremiah and Councillor Hall who did not want to enter confidential. They're voting against. All three. I got a nod. There we go. All three have voted against. Councillors will now move into confidential and Session. Let me know when the... Welcome back, everybody, to the open session. Thank you, councillors, for your questions and the value of taking it into confidential, Councillor Bradley, because a number of councillors raised things once we were in there, so good work. Councillors, you have a motion on the screen. Would anyone like to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor Lane, seconded by Councillor Kransky. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been carried unanimously with the exception of Councillor Russell.
I'll abstain for now.
No, you abstain forever. No, it's okay. Councillor Russell has abstained. Councillors, that brings us to the end of the program leaders' reports. Do you have any general business for Kirsten? Kirsten, do you have general business for us? Dr. Scott?
No, I do not, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Anyone got general business for Dr. Scott? There being none, thank you very much, councillors. The meeting is closed at 11:04. The City Infrastructure Committee meeting will begin in 10 minutes at 11:14.